I think we have enough questions now, so you don't have to write any more questions. They're working hard on their own. Can we have the panelists and the candidates all come to the stage, please? Now that's it.
Good evening and welcome to the Hampton Schools. My name is Lars Clemenson. I'm the proud superintendent of this great school district. Welcome to... I'd like to say welcome to Zeldin and Perry Gershon, and thank you both for your willingness to serve Congressional District 1. The mission of the Hampton-based schools is quite clear. It's to do four things: to make sure kids graduate with a solid foundation in academics, a strong character, a commitment to their community, and a commitment to lifelong learning. We have lots of first-time voters in this room tonight, our seniors who are volunteering as part of our government and social service. No surprise to anybody who's turned on the TV or opened the newspaper that nationally this midterm election cycle has been passionate and sometimes negatively contentious. Because this is a school and because my priority are my children, I'll ask you to be good role models tonight. The candidates tonight want to share their views and they want to earn your vote, and my students need to see what good civic engagement looks like. So I'll welcome you. I'll turn it over to the League of Women Voters, and before I do so, I will say thank you to our partners in the community, the Southampton Town Law Enforcement, our security team, our chaperones tonight, on helping make sure that you all have a productive opportunity to hear from our candidates tonight. And I'll ask you to take responsibility for your behavior. If you're sitting next to someone who doesn't think like you or believe like you, remember, children are watching, and this is a school. Welcome. I'd like to introduce you to the
Good evening. I'm going to ask you all to stand so we can observe a moment of silence to honor the victims and their families in Pittsburgh and Louisville. Now, will you please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Welcome to the debate between the candidates for election to the representative for the 1st Congressional District of New York State. Zeldin, the incumbent, and Gershon, the challenger. This debate is being co-sponsored by the League of Women Voters, the Hampton Bays Civic Association, and the Press News Group. In case you don't know, the election will be November the 6th, and if you need an absentee ballot, they're outside. My name is Kathy Peacock, and I'm with the League of Women Voters, and I will be the moderator for this evening. I think the superintendent was very eloquent. I'm going to go on and say that both candidates have asked us to inform everyone at this event that they want it to be civil and respectful. Please refrain from making any verbal reactions to the comments of the candidates and hold your applause from now on until after their closing comments. Please honor the candidate's request. We want to thank the Hampton Bays School District and all its personnel, especially Superintendent Lars Clemenson, for all their assistance in organizing this event. The debate is being filmed by CTV for repeated broadcasts in its entirety up until November the 6th. Only the League has the right to arrange for the taping and recording of a debate. There shall be no other taping or recording. Let me introduce those with roles this evening. The panel who will be asking the questions are Janice Landis of the Hampton Bays Civic Association, Carol Meller of the League, Catherine Manu of the Sag Harbor Express, and Joe Shaw of the Press News Group. Down in front, we have Barbara McClancy of the League, who will be the timer for the event. Hampton Bays students were the ones that were gathering up all of the cards in the aisle, and thank you for putting so many great questions together. League members on the table on the floor, Gloria Burke and Estelle Gelman, and Maria Holtz of the Hampton Bays Civic Association are screening the questions now to avoid any duplication, to ensure that they're actually issue-based and questions that both candidates can answer. Word about the League. The League of Women Voters is a trusted, nonpartisan, political, national organization. While we never endorse any candidates or political parties, we are directly involved in the many issues that make our communities strong. We're respected for the work that we do in coordinating things like these candidate debates and for preparing and distributing educational materials on voting issues. None of the sponsors of this debate have endorsed a candidate at this time. I'd like to remind all of you, if you haven't done so, please shut off your cell phones. Thank you. Now, on to the debate. Prior to the debate, the staff for each of the candidates did a coin flip to see who was going to go first in making their opening statement. And then we'll reverse back and forth. They'll take turns answering each question first or second. Before we start the questions, each candidate will make a 2-minute opening statement. Then they'll have 2 minutes to respond to each of the questions. After both candidates have answered a question, if one of the candidates would like an additional minute to either rebut what their opponent said or to add to their answer, they'll raise a red card, so I know they want to say something, and they have another minute. Then at the end, each candidate will have another minute to do closing statements. This is the only South Fork congressional debate open to the public. This makes the information the candidates have to give us very important. So to allow the maximum topics to get covered, I'm going to ask you to hold your applause and any verbal noises that you might make so that we have the maximum time until after their closing comments. So, let's begin. Mr. Zeldin, you won the coin toss.
Well, thank you to the league for the school district to be hosting us. Well, thank you to the league, to our great hosts and moderators tonight. Thank you to my opponent for running, for all of his supporters, my supporters, those who have come and still trying to make up your mind for next Tuesday's election. I think it's great that you're all out here participating in the process. I was born and raised on Long Island. I actually attended grade school just a few miles from here. My wife, Diana, and our twin daughters, Michaela and Ariana, live now just a few blocks from where I grew up. In the Army, I served 4 years on active duty. I'm now in the reserves, where I've been serving for a little over 11 years, just selected for promotion to lieutenant colonel. I've had different capacities in my service there as a military intelligence officer, a prosecutor, a magistrate, a paratrooper with the 82nd Airborne Division. In the state Senate, I repealed the MTA payroll tax for 80% of employers, co-sponsored the nation's strongest property tax cap, reduced middle income tax rates to the lowest level in 60 years, repealed the saltwater fishing license fee. I created the Dwyer program for our veterans with post-traumatic stress. And we also created a new law that I authored to protect our families from protests and military burials. My priorities in Congress include protecting our security at home and abroad, helping grow our economy, fighting for our veterans and our first responders, to improve healthcare and education in America, to safeguard our environment, to improve our infrastructure. We also must do a better job at securing our borders, defeating MS-13, combating the heroin and opioid abuse epidemic, and human trafficking, and sex trafficking, and drug trafficking. I'm ranked as the 39th most bipartisan member of Congress in the country. I work with anyone in Congress to try to find common ground whenever possible to be able to deliver wins for our district. I've gotten a lot of different bills passed and signed into law, my adult day health care bill, and my FAA proposal, my Common Core amendment, and so much more. My Safe Bridges Act, which has already resulted in important funding. In addition to getting approval and funding for New York One projects, my office has also successfully resolved almost 10,000 cases. Thank you again to everybody for being here. I ask for your support 1 week from tomorrow. And again, whether you're here to support my opponent or me, or you have an open mind, I think it's great that you're active in the process.
Thank you, Mr. Zeldin. Mr. Gershon.
Thank you to the league. Thank you, Mr. Zeldin, and thank you to the audience for coming out to listen. This election provides a stark contrast in two approaches. I'm a businessman. For the last 30 years, I've been successful as an innovator, as a conciliator, and as a small business entrepreneur. I've never run for public office. My opponent is a skilled lawyer, a seasoned politician, and he's become an expert at self-promotion on cable news networks. But is he still in touch with the people of this district and the issues that concern them? While he will tell you about bills he's delivered on through the evening and many successes, particularly right before Election Day, is he really out there fighting for you on national issues of local importance? Things like affordable health care, protecting our environment, making sure we have high wages here in Suffolk County and lower taxes. Is he fighting to undo the effects of the tax plan that just passed with a cap on our property tax deduction that's really going to hurt us Long Islanders? We need a change, and I'm running on issues, and that's been the theme of my campaign. I am not a skillful performer like my opponent is, but that's not what you're here to judge. You're not looking for the best performer. You're looking for the person most in tune with your position. And my campaign has been based on issues and solutions, how to make Long Islanders' lives better, and how the federal government has a role in that. I've avoided personal insults and personal attacks throughout because that's not the best way forward. We need to come back together as a nation. We need to tone down the hostile rhetoric and govern as one country, not a red country and a blue country. That's what made me run for office, and that's why I'm asking for your vote next week. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ms. Miller will ask the first question, and Mr. Gershon, you're going to answer first.
Each of you has a different plan for providing health care. Please give us a description of the plan you favor and detail the best arguments in favor of your plan.
So, we've come a long way when President Obama first took office to today in the ACA. Americans now have coverage for pre-existing conditions where they did not used to have that coverage. First and foremost, we must make sure we keep it. We can't be going backward. We can't vote for a plan that undoes all of the benefits of the ACA. That's what matters to people in this district. And that raised a fracas when Lee voted against the ACA. He did it before President Trump was elected, and he did it again for Trump's health care plan. That would have left people with pre-existing coverage without health care. We need to reduce prescription drug costs. We need to work with Medicare to allow Medicare to negotiate against Big Pharma. That's something candidate Trump ran on, and it's something he mentioned last week, and we have to move forward with it. That's how we're going to make healthcare fairer. We need to reduce healthcare costs. Well, how do we do that? Well, one way is making sure that the president is enforcing the rules of the ACA and not trying to destroy it. Then there are other things. The ultimate goal must be universal healthcare. Universal healthcare, because healthcare is a right, it's not a privilege. That means we need to make sure everyone has insurance and can use preventative health care and doesn't rely on the emergency room for their health care service. That will reduce the cost of health care delivery. That's the critical foundation of any plan going forward. I support a single-payer Medicare for all system as the ultimate goal, but it's not going to happen next year or the year after. And it's not going to happen on a one-party basis. It only works with a broad consensus. We need agreement from both parties to move forward. And when the time is right, I think we'll get to Medicare for all. But that is not the immediate priority.
Thank you. Mr. Zeldin?
Well, people get their healthcare from different forms. So you have the individual market, the employer market, Medicaid, Medicare. Some people work for the government. Whatever we can do to improve any way that people get healthcare is really important. The American Health Care Act that I voted on, it would have been a better step forward than what this current status quo is. I disagree with the ACA. I would have voted against it. It's important to note that New York State has had coverage for pre-existing conditions since the 90s. It's also important to note that the American Health Care Act specifically states in that an insured cannot deny coverage for someone with pre-existing conditions, including all sorts of other coverage and protections for individuals with pre-existing conditions. We also have to reduce the cost of healthcare. So where we are on the South Fork right now, I mean, we really need tort reform. Medical malpractice rates being as high as they are. You don't have a neurosurgeon. If you have head trauma, you have to go elsewhere. OBGYN having close to $300,000 in medical malpractice rates. It was positive progress to pass the FDA Reauthorization Act to bring generics to market faster. We have to reduce the cost of prescription drugs. A lot of our government does negotiate the cost of prescription drugs, and more of our agencies should, including Medicare. It's also important that we are taking care of the heroin opioid abuse epidemic. I co-sponsored and helped pass the Comprehensive Addiction and Recovery Act. We need to focus on education, rehabilitation, treatment, prevention. HR 6 just got passed and signed into law as well. The 21st Century Cures Act that I passed and signed into law, that was signed by the president, is legislation to invest into the NIH billions of dollars to be able to search for cures to cancer, Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, but also rare diseases as well. So that research for cures is incredibly important as well. I don't agree with Medicare for all, the cost. My opponent and really no one else has figured out how to pay for it. I do not want a government-controlled, one-size-fits-all takeover of healthcare. That's not in the best interest of my constituents.
Thank you. Mr. Gershon would like to use a right comment.
First and foremost, Medicare for all is not a one-size-fits-all system. It is a better way forward to bring single payer, to have a single source of payments, but it's far from government takeover of healthcare, quite different than what we have in the UK. In terms of the ACA stabilized the New York markets in 2014. The New York law was not doing that. The ACA was an improvement, and taking it away would be a step backward. The ACHA, while it may have had a provision that required insurers to cover pre-existing conditions, it didn't specify cost, which meant an insurer could charge extra for people with pre-existing conditions. That's not helpful. And it gave states, because of an amendment that was put in before passage to get certain conservative votes, it gave states the ability to really let the ACA, the pre-existing condition coverage go away. It was not a way to maintain what we have today. It was a major step backward.
Mr. Zeldin would like an additional minute.
I mean, first off, again, pre-existing conditions, that's been covered in New York State since the 1990s, yet my opponent again and again and again is trying to convince people that we're taking away coverage for people with pre-existing conditions here in New York. We should note that the American Health Care Act specifically states, nothing in this act shall be construed as permitting health insurance issuers to limit access to health coverage for individuals with pre-existing conditions. We put it right into the text of the bill to make sure that we were covering people with pre-existing conditions. You know, and on top of that, I don't think that the ACA stabilized our market. When someone was going to cancer treatment at Sloan Kettering, and in the middle of their treatment, they're getting a notice from Health Republic that they're going under, or even to this day, a provider that is owed 7, 8+ figures of payments that they never got paid back, you're getting cancer treatment at Sloan Kettering, you'll be told that your coverage was terminated then, not like 90 days from now, but right then and there. That was an ACA, that was an Obamacare impact. Our premiums can go up, the deductibles that are going up, and insurers pulling out of our market. I would not say that the ACA helped New York State.
Thank you. The next question will be asked by Mr. Shaw, and Mr. Zeldin, you'll respond first.
Thanks, Kathy. I want to say that I'm a proud resident of Hampton Bays, so for everybody who's visiting, welcome, and it's great to be having this event in Hampton Bays. But people who know me also know that I'm very proud of my hometown, which is Pittsburgh. And we suffered a great loss this weekend on Saturday when 11 people were murdered in the Tree of Life Synagogue in the Squirrel Hill section of Pittsburgh. After that happened, Pittsburgh Mayor Bill Fiduto was quoted as saying, "We should take the guns, which are the common denominator of every mass shooting in America, out of the hands of those looking to express hatred through murder." I'd like to ask both candidates, how would you respond to the mayor of Pittsburgh?
I absolutely agree that any criminal, terrorist, someone who's mentally ill, for someone who is not going to be a law-abiding citizen with their firearm, they should not have a firearm.
I also believe that we should be tackling the hate that that firearm did not discharge itself. There was someone who was filled with a tremendous amount of anti-Semitism. It is outrageous what happened. It just so happens that, I mean, this is the only race in America that has 2 Jewish candidates. This should not happen anywhere in the world. And when you see it happen right here at home, it churns your stomach. I'm one of 2 Jewish Republicans in Congress. I co-chair the House Republican Israel Caucus. I'm a board member of the United States Holocaust Museum down in Washington, D.C. And I can't speak for my opponent, but I don't know anyone in this room who doesn't believe that we have to get at that hatred because we need to protect religious freedom in this country. It is a right. No matter what your religion is, you should feel free and safe to be able to protect and practice your religion safely. There should be no fear. In a Holocaust survivor, to be 97 years old and that is how your life is going to end, it's inexcusable. There's no justification for what happened. And listen, our country's not going to do a good job in uniting between now and November 6th. I wish I could say otherwise. But what's very important is that on November 7th, we're all coming together. That's everybody in this room. Whoever up here finishes first or second, there's an important message on election night, is that the people have spoken, the residents of the 1st Congressional District have spoken, and that we need to work together to move forward. And if your candidate comes in first or your candidate comes in second, we need to do a better job unifying. I also believe, by the way, the State Department needs to appoint a special envoy to combat anti-Semitism all around the world. But we really have to get at the reason why that trigger got pulled.
Thank you. Mr. Gershon?
Well, the question was on guns specifically, and I am very much against the sale of assault weapons like the AR-15. But having said that, I hope we'll get another question on guns, but I want to use the time to talk about the hate in America as well. I'm deeply disturbed, as is Mr. Zeldin, with what happened in Pittsburgh on Saturday. And I'm almost, maybe even as deeply disturbed by the pipe bombs that were sent out during the week to opponents or perceived opponents of the President of the United States. None of this should be happening in America. And it's an outproduct of the poison rhetoric that's filling our country. But the leader-in-chief of this country is the major proponent of the poison rhetoric. He doesn't stop. He wants to blame the media. He wants to blame the press as the enemy of the state. But he doesn't take responsibility himself for his own words. And if he doesn't do that, we'll never heal. Let's go back to Charlottesville, because that's really where it started. He condemned both sides for just an ultra disgusting event of racist display of racism and hatred. That gives license to lunatics who may have deep-seated anti-Semitic rage, but keep it quiet, come out and show their passion. If we allow people like that, because of the tone in the country, to come out and show their emotions, they're going to do it. Not most of them, but that one person who escapes from rational thought and takes action, that's who hurts all of society. We've got to tone it down. It starts with the president. It goes to both of us. We can't be calling each other names. We can't be fermenting anti-Semitism. We can't be giving dog whistles to our supporters. We can't be doing it.
Thank you. Mr. Zeldin would like an additional minute.
I mean, the President of the United States, whether it's the last president, the current president, the next president, whoever that is, has a very important role to play in unifying our country. There's no doubt about that. But with regards to that question, for so much of that answer to be focused on putting the blame on the President of the United States for what happened in Pittsburgh, I think is pretty outrageous. And, and on top of that, the person who pulled the trigger was anti-Trump. The person who pulled the trigger carried out the act because he thought that the President of the United States was being too friendly towards Jews. The President of the United States, whose daughter has converted to Orthodox Judaism, who just moved the embassy in Israel to Jerusalem, who just withdrew from the Iran nuclear deal and signed the Taylor Force Act,
he is getting criticized for being too close to Jews. The shooter was anti-Trump. So to get asked about Pittsburgh and to fill up your entire time just heaving on the president as if he pulled the trigger is outrageous.
Mr. Gershon.
What's outrageous is the way you love to twist my words, because that is nothing like what I said. Donald Trump is not responsible for anti-Semitism in this guy's heart. He's not the one who pulled the trigger. But the atmosphere that Donald Trump has created in this country that suggests that certain bad acts can be tolerated, encouraging violence at rallies, creates an atmosphere where the lunatics come out and do their thing. That's what's wrong. We can't have that. I'm not saying the president is an anti-Semite. He's not. I've met him. He is not an anti-Semite. But he's enabling anti-Semitism in America by not taking responsibility for his own words and not condemning hate and violence the way he should be. It's not the media that's responsible for what happens. It's the rhetoric in this country, and it's got to stop.
The next question is going to be asked by Ms. Landis, and Mr. Gershon, you'll be first answering.
Thank you, Kathy. The degrading health of our local bays due to nitrogen overload is a major community concern. One initiative being explored to mitigate the situation is the installation of a tidal floodgate in Dune Road, which would serve the dual purpose of both alleviating the perennial flooding problem and flushing the bays, thus lessening their nitrogen content. If deemed environmentally feasible, would you support the funding of such a project?
It's very important that we protect our environment. Long Island is an island by definition. We're surrounded by water, we drink water, we rely on water for our tourism. We're polluting our water with nitrogen. So anything we can do to lower the amount of nitrogen that gets into the water is a step in the right direction. The federal government has a major role in funding projects that are going to help our environment, not just here locally, but nationally. And we haven't been doing that under the Trump administration. The last 2 years, we've gone backward, and that's got to change. And I've been saying that throughout the campaign. We need to protect the environment, and the federal government must be our partner. If this is a good solution and it's environmentally sound, we should do everything we can to get it funded, which means getting money from Uncle Sam. Important way to move forward. But we need to do other things as well. We need to be using federal money to fight climate change. We should be in the Paris Accord. We shouldn't have withdrawn. We should be moving away from fossil fuels and onto cleaner forms of energy. We should be promoting solar and wind and electric vehicles and renewing tax cuts for people who use it, not trying to make those go away. We're on a course in the wrong direction, whether that involves nitrogen in our water and are not doing our part to fund renewable cleanup projects, whether that's for sewer systems in parts of this district or research on clean septic. We must do more, and that's the federal government's role. We got to do it with the state and the locality, the communities. Federal government doesn't have the expertise on how the money should be spent, but it has the money to give to locally feasible and intelligent projects, and that's what we should be doing more of.
Thank you. Mr. Zeldin?
If the local community wants it, then the answer is absolutely. And it's not just for the positive environmental impacts, but also the positive economic impacts. You have a lot of businesses that are on Dune Road. There are a lot of people who they travel to Dune Road over the course of the season, and when there's high tide, it's constantly flooded out. I mean, this is a multi-pronged issue, and nitrogen loading in our environment is one part of a very important issue that your question gets to the heart of. It was great to see that the Long Island Sound program was tripled over the course of this Congress, that Sea Grant was fully funded, that the National Estuary Program was fully funded as well. There is obviously a hugely important role for the federal government to play. It's next Congress that you're breaking ground on the Fire Island to Montauk Point plan. 83 miles of coastline, over $1 billion that's coming to our area, an idea that's over half a century old, now coming to fruition, and that's really exciting. So a lot of that money is going to be spent here locally. It's also important for local businesses and residences to pursue coastal resiliency, to not overdevelop our coastline. Whether you are an individual homeowner or business owner, when rain hits your roof and goes through your fertilizer and it goes down the stream and into your water, you're seeing adverse impacts to our local water quality. I just secured a dredge for the Moriches Inlet. The Long Island Intracoastal Waterway is going to be right behind that. That's important for our boaters, our fishermen, our marine businesses. It's also important for our environment. We're not too far from the Forge River and the Carmen's River, highly polluted waterways that need to get flushed out more. One of the best ways to do that is through this project to open up the inlets and these waterways. We are all connected. So even if whether you're in the Mastic Peninsula, you're here locally, or you're further out east, that investment of Army Corps projects, that focus, especially as we go through the Fire Island Montauk Point plan, is going to all be helpful to that goal.
Thank you. Mr. Gershon would like an additional minute.
I can understand your environmental commitment that you talk about, but why are you voting to support coal over renewables? Why are you voting to reduce our air quality standard? Why aren't you standing up in opposition when the Trump administration wants to relax all of our clean air standards, our oil emission, our fuel emission standards? Why aren't you on top of these issues, which really have the long-term impact on us in our environment? And why are you happy when Trump pulled out of the Paris Accord and made us a world pariah? We need to reduce our carbon usage if we're going to survive as a planet. I don't think you take the other side of that, but why aren't we taking action right now? It was a fair enough agreement. It was a step in the right direction. And if we wanted to negotiate better, we could stay in and negotiate.
Mr. Zeldin would like an additional minute.
Yeah, I appreciate my opponent spending his minute asking 9,000 different questions. But I will tell you, I supported the decision that was made with regards to Paris. We were making unilateral concessions on our part, while other countries, the world's largest polluters, were agreeing to increase emissions. We agreed to that. We set these huge goals for the United States on an accord where China is telling us in exchange that they're going to increase emissions. And where in Canada and the European Union, there were debates and there was a vote. Here it was the President of the United States agreeing to it on behalf of our country. You want to ask questions? Why is it that your financial disclosure has an investment between $250,000 and $500,000 in offshore oil? And when you were asked about it, because you were supporting the infrastructure on the port, you were asked whether or not that exists on your financial disclosure. The answer to the voter was no. Why don't you just say yes? Why don't you just tell the voter what the truth is?
Thank you. You can't go back. You can't go
He
back.
asked me a direct question.
Next question. You'll have to wait for the next question.
Again, he asked me a
I'm
direct
sorry.
question.
You'll have to handle that in another red card opportunity. Ms. Manu, you get to ask the next question, and Mr. Zeldin will be responding first.
Thank you, Kathy. I want to piggyback a little bit on the last question. East Hampton Town has unveiled concepts for a hamlet study for downtown Montauk that in part suggests businesses move away from the shoreline. What are your thoughts on coastal retreat? And what is your position on how we should be preparing to deal with the impacts of climate change?
Well, with regards to Montauk, I do not suggest that people move away from the coastline. The first Congressional, we have people in the rest of the country. Their advice for people who live in the first Congressional District is to move away from the first Congressional District. They want us to move away from the coastline. They tell that to the entire Atlantic seaboard. When we're talking about National Flood Insurance Program and the cost of premiums. Some of these homes do get hit multiple times, again and again and again. That's an issue. We need a long-term reauthorization of NFIP. But the answer isn't just telling everyone who lives in the first Congressional District that they need to move away from the coast. This is our district. This is our home. The Fire Island Montauk Point plan includes bringing a whole lot more sand to protect the coastline. There's a huge revetment project that's going to be going on to help protect the coastline. And it's not just a higher dune and a wider dune, but a longer dune as well. It's up to the business owner in Montauk. If they want to move their business, that's up to them. But I do not believe that the federal government should be coming in and telling them that they need to move their businesses off the coastline. The job of the representative from the 1st Congressional District is to help protect the 1st Congressional District. Now, we do have an issue in our district with rising sea levels. And climate change is something that needs to be taken seriously. I'm a member of the Bipartisan Climate Solutions Caucus. We need to do a better job working together. With the rhetoric that goes back and forth, what we need to do is ensure that all of our constituents have access to clean air and clean water. And all of the above energy strategies, funding the RPE project at BNL and Stony Brook. Offshore wind could be a great idea, but you need to give a seat at the table for our fishermen, because that has been a huge problem that I've noticed as the representative for the district. We also have these outdated, economically and environmentally inefficient plants. And we are paying more for our energy. All of that, and in fact, over the course of the last 25 years, we've seen the emission rates go down. We're at a 7-year low of high ozone layer days. That's all good, but we always need to do more. But no, I do not believe people should move away from the coastline.
Thank you. Mr. Gershon?
There's nothing like telling a whopper to deflect attention or to create an illusion of something that you know isn't true. So let's start on my supposed offshore oil investment. I do not invest in any offshore oil drilling. That was what I was asked in Massac Beach. I answered that I don't, and I don't. Look at my financials. I invest in a piece of the Louisiana infrastructure, part of their port. Has absolutely nothing to do with offshore oil drilling, and you know that. But again, you like to deflect. We just got a question about rising sea levels, and you talked about how no one should be telling us here on the East End to withdraw from our land. Well, of course no one should be saying that. That wasn't the question. The issue is global warming and rising sea levels, and how does it affect us? And the number one thing we should be doing is fighting climate change. And we stopped doing that with this administration. And you're not pursuing policies that would be fighting climate change. Maybe you're giving lip service to it here, but that has not been your record for the last 2 years. It's not been the record of the policy that this administration has been putting through. We need to be taking steps like going back in the Paris Accord to reduce our carbon emission if we're going to fight climate change, which is what we need to do to really deal with rising sea levels. Because if we don't, doesn't matter how many seawalls we build, how many sandbags we bring in, we're going to lose if we don't fight the war instead of working on Band-Aids. We must fight climate change. We must fight it proactively. It is the biggest threat to all of us as a civilization, and especially as residents here on Long Island.
Thank you. Mr. Zeldin?
They did ask whether or not people should pull away from the coastline. With regards to the offshore oil, without there being a site, the whole reason why that exists is to store all of the offshore oil. That's what the investment is. And actually by statute, Louisiana statute, to promote, plan, finance, develop, construct, control, license, regulate, supervise, operate, manage, maintain, and modify offshore terminal facilities within its jurisdiction. You can pick a word in there. That's all about storing offshore oil. And that's not my word. You don't take my word for that. That's the Louisiana statute. So when you're asked the question, the best thing to do is just give an honest answer up front, and then fast forward to something like today, you're not going to be called out on it. But the reality is you got asked by a voter about what was on your financial disclosure. Do you have an investment in offshore oil? And your answer was no. And if you thought maybe it was something different, you don't just say no to the constituent. You don't lie to your constituents in the face. If there's another explanation, you give it. But the investment was in a port, a storage facility for offshore oil. And the statute specifically states stuff like operating, managing, maintaining, supervising, constructing, developing, promoting, planning, and financing.
Thank you. Mr. Gershon?
Not there in any of those words you read was drilling. The question was, am I involved in offshore oil?
Please hold your
There is
applause.
no drilling there.
Hold your applause.
This is a facility that connects a storage vehicle connecting it with a pipe to a refinery. The Louisiana port accepts oil from imported oil from offshore tankers that transport oil, not drill for oil, and it brings the tankers of oil that are being imported into Louisiana to the refinery, because the boats can't get that close to shore without risking oil leaks, and that would be a disaster. This is infrastructure for the port of Louisiana. It has zero to do with offshore oil drilling. And that was the question.
Thank you. The next question is going to come from Ms. Miller, and Mr. Gershon, you'll be answering first.
Thank you. This question is from the audience. One of the members of our audience has asked, the American Lung Association has rated Suffolk County air quality as the worst in the state. Would you pledge more money to the EPA to address this issue? And would you favor more funding for the EPA? And would you support the reinstatement of the Clean Air Act standards?
Mr. Gershon.
Yes. No, seriously, we need to do more about our clean air and our clean water, because that's what we live in. And that is an issue that means something to everyone here on Long Island. And we stopped doing what we should be doing in the last 2 years. The EPA used to be a bipartisan organization. It was created under President Nixon. It was not a controversial organization. We all wanted to protect our environment. Well, now we've sold out. We'd rather support big business at our own expense, and even more at the expense of our children and their children. We don't want to breathe smog. We should be having better emission standards. The automakers are fine with it. They don't want the relaxation that the Trump administration has put through. My job as your representative is to fight for clean air standards, to fight for the EPA, for EPA funding, and to protect our environment. That's what we all should be talking about. That's what you want to hear from both of us. Lee's going to give an answer in a few minutes that's going to talk about how he supports the environment. But look at his record. Thank you.
Mr. Zeldin?
Yeah, you should. Voting to triple the EPA's Long Island Sound program, I'm proud of that. Leading the effort to reauthorize the EPA's Long Island Sound program at $65 million per year. Last time it was reauthorized was 2006. Leading the effort with Democratic Congressman Joe Courtney of Connecticut to fully fund Sea Grant was another effort that you should look at. Multiple proposals that have passed the House in order to protect Plum Island. We have fully funded the National Estuary Program, increased funding to the EPA Wetlands Program. All of these are very good and important programs for the 1st Congressional District of New York. Now, I will say that it's very important for all of our government to operate as effectively as possible. I'm not talking about any blank checks, and it doesn't matter if it's the Department of Defense, Homeland Security, it doesn't matter if it's the EPA. There should be no blank checks. With all of that being said, we should be investing in these very important programs that help us here in the 1st Congressional District, and you should look at all of that effort that I have been very involved in. And as I mentioned earlier, we have some very outdated ways to get our energy here on Long Island. Citi Field was built when Shea Stadium came down. The new Yankee Stadium got built. We have these economically and environmentally inefficient plants all across Long Island. One of the main reasons why they're open is politics. It helps provide for the property taxes in the area where the power plant is. When you look at Caithness 1, there's talk about a Caithness 2. We talked earlier about the offshore wind. I don't support the idea of offshore drilling off of our coast. That doesn't help. I will throw in that I don't believe we even have the resources off our coast. We don't have the infrastructure. We don't want it. There's a lot more that we can do here on Long Island. I mentioned earlier the RPE, clean and green, all of the above energy strategy. It's helping our environment, helping our economy. But yeah, you should look at all the different efforts to make sure that EPA funding for our district has actually increased during my time, not decreased.
Thank you. Mr. Gershon, 1 minute.
I think the question was about clean air. I didn't hear the word air in anything you said just now, pointing that out. Let's talk about Plum Island. It's great to say you delivered a victory in the House for Plum Island. Well, the Republicans control the House. You're a Republican. Glad you got that proved. The Republicans control the Senate. Didn't happen there. Hasn't been put on the Senate floor. The Republican controls the presidency. I don't see Donald Trump pushing for Plum Island. Last thing I heard of Donald Trump and Plum Island, he was talking about maybe developing a golf course there. If you want to save Plum Island, let's pass a law that says the federal government will not sell Plum Island, period. That's not what's in the House bill anyway, but that's how we really save Plum Island. And that's what the senators from New York and Connecticut are saying. And that's what I'll support if I'm elected. Thank you.
Mr. Zeldin, 1 minute.
Yeah, and there's a whole lot more to that. I mean, if we're going to turn this into the Plum Island issue actually hasn't been partisan until about a minute ago. But now that we're going to make it partisan for a moment, let's point out that it was a Democratic-controlled Congress that passed the law to sell Plum Island to the highest bidder. That wasn't a Republican Congress. It was an all Democratic-controlled Congress that moved the mission to Kansas, the Animal and Animal Disease Research Center. They're moving it to Kansas. They're selling Plum Island the highest bidder. Now, what happened for the first time in my 4 years is that just under a year ago, a request was made by one Democratic senator to pass my bill by unanimous consent. There has not been any request for a hearing on any of the bills. There has not been a request for a markup on any of the bills. There hasn't been a request to pass a bill in the Senate by 51 votes or 60 votes. The only request came at the end of my 3rd year by one of our senators for unanimous consent. Whatever the Senate can pass, I can get passed in the House, and 534 other members of Congress know it.
Thank you. The next question will be asked by Mr. Shaw, and Mr. Zeldin, you're going to answer first.
President Trump recently announced a proposal to have the Department of Health and Human Services, when providing services, change the definition of gender to be a binary choice based on biological sex at birth only. Do you support this proposal?
For one, we do need to change the definition that was created by the Obama administration of internal sense of gender. So if you, by the way, including sexual orientation, especially sexual orientation, because that's the question, absolutely should be protected, and gender. It doesn't matter whether it's a protected class or another one that isn't statutorily currently in law. You should not be discriminated against with employment activities and housing activities. People should feel safe. And that includes not having a policy in place where someone could go into, a male can go into a female bathroom or a male can go into a female locker room and then say afterwards that it was not a violation of any law because their internal sense of gender told them that they were a female when they went into the female locker room. I have a problem with that. So it's the same thing as registering someone to vote out here on the South Fork. You can register to vote where your heart is. So if you want to challenge someone's registration, if they register out here in the 1st District, the burden would be to prove that their heart is not where they register. Now we have to change the definition.
Please hold your
We
comment.
have to change the definition that we saw in the Obama administration, but we also have to ensure that we are changing it in a way that is protecting individuals outside of the statutory classes. And that includes sexual orientation. That includes gender and some of these other topics that are part of this conversation. But we need to see both sides of this argument, and we have to ensure that the standard that puts into place is one that is not just being sensitive to that individual who actually is transgender. It also has to be sensitive to everyone who's impacted in that school, in that locker room, the parents who care, faculty, and others.
Thank you. Mr. Gershon?
There you go again, changing the issue. The question was the definition of transgender, and the implication was how it affects some of the decisions that the Trump administration has been trying to put through. The Trump administration tried to ban transgender in the military. That was stopped by the Secretary of Defense. So the Trump administration is now looking at an end around. Why does it want to do this? I don't understand it. I don't see the motivation. It's wrong. I am absolutely for the Equality Act and for protecting all people in this country. For whatever reason, the president is pushing this agenda, perhaps to rile up his base. Perhaps it's to increase the rhetoric, the tone of the rhetoric in this country, so we can forget that instead of being about being inclusive in the military, we can make this about bathrooms. But that's not what this is really about. It's pushing the issue aside and trying to divert from what we're really talking about. Trying to bring the country together should be our focus, especially given the events of the last week. It does not matter whether you're discriminating against LGBTQ, whether you're discriminating against trans, whether you're discriminating against Jews, whether you're discriminating against African Americans, brown, black, it doesn't matter. Discrimination is wrong. And a president who's pushing a discriminatory agenda sets the wrong tone for society.
Please hold your applause. The next question is going to be asked by Ms. Landes. And Mr. Gershon, you'll be answering first.
Thank you, Kathy. This question is from the audience, and it states, do you believe Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid are entitlements? Do you support the current programs? Would you support privatizing Social Security?
Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, these are programs our people have come to depend on from our government. They're not entitlements. They're rights that we have. We pay into these systems and we expect to get something for it. Our government has a contract with its people to deliver, and we must protect Social Security, we must protect Medicare, we must protect and expand Medicaid. That's what the government's primary role is, or certainly among them. We shouldn't be having a discussion about cutting back Social Security. If there are questions about how do we fund it better, let's get rid of the cap on Social Security taxes. Let people pay more into the system, people who can afford it. There's no reason that the wealthiest people should pay less as a percentage than people who can't afford to pay. And we can make the money in these programs go a whole lot further if we did that. The idea of privatization is completely backward. These are public services, public goods. You don't privatize public goods, like you don't privatize airports, like you don't privatize roads, you don't privatize the VA, you don't privatize Social Security and Medicare. Not if we want it to be public services for our people.
Thank you. Mr. Zeldin?
Well, first off, with regards to Social Security, Medicare, I guess Medicaid was part of the question as well, but for our seniors, those who are close to retirement, we have to 100% completely preserve and protect that commitment. These are programs that individuals have paid into. They should be getting the full 100% protection of these programs. With regards to Medicaid, these programs are operated by the state. And a lot of the money, most of the money, gets paid for by the federal government. There are efficiencies that can be found in Medicaid where we are actually delivering more to people who need it than under the current status quo, where there are individuals making for themselves 7, 8 figures, providers milking Medicaid, and I have a problem with that. We have to be smart in how we approach this discussion going forward. Privatizing Social Security is not the answer. My daughters are 12 years old. At some point, and I don't believe it's going to be the next Congress, it might be 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 12 years from now. It's probably not going to be the same time between Social Security and Medicare. But our country needs to have a conversation with each other what we are going to do to, one, ensure that we are totally covering our seniors and those who are close to retirement with Social Security and Medicare. And also ensuring that it's going to be there for my daughters and their generation. So that's going to mean a 50-year plan, a 60-year plan, a 70-year plan. And we're going to have to come together. That's bipartisan, bicameral, Republican, Democrat, conservative, liberal. And that means you can't go out and scare someone who's a 95-year-old right now, making them think that we're trying to change Social Security as you know it, or change Medicare as you know it, and they're going to lose a benefit that they desperately need. But we do need to have a conversation for that next generation to make sure it's there for them.
Thank you. Mr. Gershon, 1 minute.
We should tell that to Mitch McConnell.
Hey, come on now.
Seriously. Social Security is a service that the government promises its people. We shouldn't be tinkering with it. Not for the seniors today, but I'll go one step further. Not for the young people today either. They're going to be paying into a system that gives them retirement security. That's the future that they're promised. Raising the retirement age for them is no better than raising the retirement age for people who are already in the system or expecting to get Social Security in the next few years. We need to get more money into the Social Security system, not take away the benefits that we give people, not raise the Social Security age, and not hurt the next generation or the one after that. It's not the right way to go.
Thank you. Ms. Manu will ask the next question, and Mr. Zeldin, you'll respond first.
Thank you, Kathy. This is actually a question from the audience. With the heroin and opioid epidemic we're facing, what do you plan to do to help combat this issue plaguing our families?
First off, whatever you do today, great. You need to wake up tomorrow and ask, what else can we do to combat the heroin opioid abuse epidemic? We're not going to just be done with it with one bill. And I've seen this during my time in Congress. The last Congress, the top priority of the advocates nationally was to pass the Comprehensive Addiction and Recovery Act into law. And that's not treatment, prevention, rehabilitation. And the top priority of the advocates this Congress was to get H.R. 6 passed and signed into law. The good news about the 113th Congress, 114th Congress, was that CARA, the Comprehensive Addiction and Recovery Act, was passed and signed into law. The good news about the 115th Congress is that H.R. 6 was passed and signed into law. So 58 bills had passed the House. The Senate then packaged dozens of those bills into one. And at the end of September, it was passed and became law. This cannot be a partisan issue in our country. I will tell you, as a member of Congress, this is the hardest part of the job, is going to wait for a young man or young woman who had a sports injury in high school, got hooked on OxyContin, lost their prescription, and then they end up using heroin. And a beautiful girl with her entire future ahead of her is now lost. There are several dozen ideas that are all over Congress. And it doesn't matter what district you're from, what state you're from, whether you're Republican, Democrat, conservative, and liberal. We need to just always continue to do more. I see someone here is the chief of the South Country Ambulance. You save someone from a heroin overdose with Narcan, but you don't get them the help that they need, you're saving that same person with another Narcan save in that same day. Our job will never be done. There's certainly more to do.
Thank you. Mr. Gershon?
This is one I agree with a lot of what Mr. Zeldin just said. I don't think it's supposed to be a partisan issue. It can't be. If we want to solve people's problems, we have to find a way to work together as one America. I keep saying that. I really believe it. The Trump administration did a study when they first came into power on solutions for the opioid epidemic. It was a good plan. We haven't funded it. We need to actually put money behind good plans. There's a lot going wrong. The drug companies bear responsibility. We should be doing something about that. They should not be rewarded for pushing addictive painkillers, especially when they know they're addictive. They should be penalized when they do that. We should be putting more resources into rehabilitation and treatment. We shouldn't be kicking people out of treatment because their insurance runs out. We need to take better care of people who are in recovery to make sure they go the whole distance, not only part of the way. We need to do something about the importation of bad drugs. A lot of our problem isn't domestic, it's stuff coming in from China. We need to put money into border enforcement. It's all part of the big picture. But the key thing is we need to fund it. We need to work together, and we need to fund it.
Thank you. Mr. Zeldin, 1 minute.
I just want to briefly point out, it's been a top priority that has actually been a great success of fully funding CARA. And that's something that no one is stating that we're not funding the law. Now, I agree with the idea that we need to provide additional funding for more resources for new things. But that's been an important fight that has actually been a bipartisan success story, is ensuring that we were fully funded CARA. Interesting point brought up that's true with regards to the importation of these substances. And oftentimes when we talk about our border, we're talking about people that come across. This is also about substances that are coming across as well. And it's really important to strengthen border security, not just to combat people who are crossing our border illegally, but also the substances. Drug trafficking is a huge problem. We see it here in the 1st Congressional District. We have to combat the drug trafficking, and I also think that the I-STOP model for New York can be a model for the rest of the country to follow.
Thank you. The next question is going to be asked by Ms. Miller. And Mr. Gershon, you're going to answer first.
Thank you. This question is also from the audience. What legislation would you sponsor with respect to gun control laws and possessions of guns and gun ownership?
First and foremost, I support the Second Amendment. I support people's rights to own a gun to protect themselves. I don't want to take guns away from honest, hardworking citizens, whether they be here in New York 1 or anywhere else in the country. We have the right to protect ourselves. We have the right to hunt. But that does not mean we should use guns to become a public menace. We shouldn't be supplying guns to people who want to shoot up a school. We need to stop that, and it's impossible to totally stop it. But there's steps we can take to make it harder. Having universal background checks without loopholes. Penalizing people who sell guns to people who don't pass background checks. Making sure people who buy a gun at a gun show actually have passed the background check and having some way of enforcing that. That's something the federal government can do and should do. We should renew the assault weapons ban that expired in 2004. I mentioned this earlier. The AR-15 is a problem. It should not be freely available. It shouldn't be sold the way it is. We can do a lot to at least lower the damage that gets done if there are fewer AR-15s around. And most importantly, we should not have concealed carry reciprocity. That law makes no sense. It was passed by the House. Fortunately, it has not passed the Senate. But we can't have that. That will make us all less safe. It will give people from out of New York exemptions from the New York SAFE Act. That is not good public policy for any of us. That's a policy advocated by the gun lobby. It's a policy advocated by people whose main interest is selling more guns, not protecting the people here in New York 1. We should be doing what we can not to have concealed carry. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Zeldin?
Well, for one, I hope if my opponent chooses to use his red card, I'd love to know which exceptions to the SAFE Act he was referencing. I'm very familiar with the text of the law, so I hope he can list some exceptions for us. I introduced the Protect America Act after the shooting that took place in Orlando. There is a very clear-cut, common-sense way to ensure that any known or suspected terrorist is not able to purchase a firearm. The burden should be on the government to show that there is evidence that an individual is a suspected terrorist. I do believe there should be due process for that purchaser to have notice to a hearing, right to counsel at a hearing, but we can do a lot more to ensure that known and suspected terrorists do not have access to firearms or explosives. We need to do a better job to enforce laws that are currently on the books. There was a recent year where there was over 80,000 attempted illegal purchases of firearms that were stopped, system working. That the DOJ prosecuted just over 40 of them. Not 40,000 or 4,000 or 400. Over 80,000 attempted illegal purchases of firearms, the DOJ prosecuted just over 40 of them. We need to do a better job enforcing our laws that are currently on the books. With regards to bump stocks, which were used in Las Vegas, that effectively converts a firearm into a fully automatic weapon. It should be treated as such. In Parkland, that shooter manifested an intent to shoot up that school. There is a great example, if you're looking for one, of someone who should not have a firearm, when you're manifesting intent to shoot up a school with it. It's very important that we do a better job talking to each other, not past each other on this issue. As soon as there is a shooting, that you automatically go blame your member of Congress as if they pulled the trigger, it's not helping. There's a lot more that we can do, and those are a few examples, including the bill that I introduced, the Protect America.
Thank you. Mr. Gershon, 1 minute.
Let me ask why, after every school shooting, nothing gets done in Congress? After Columbine, nothing happened. After Sandy Hook, nothing happened. New York passed the SAFE Act, but nothing happened nationally. And after Parkland, as you mentioned, we haven't passed any laws. After the Las Vegas shooting, we still haven't even banned bump stocks. We've given lip service to it, but we don't get anything done. We need to commit ourselves to making this country better. We need to reduce the number of guns in circulation. You can blame the crazy person who got a gun who shouldn't have and said a law didn't work properly. You're right, it didn't. It should have worked better. But we need to make it harder for people to obtain these guns, and we should limit the guns that are available to them. Thank you.
Mr. Zeldin, 1 minute.
Still waiting for those SAFE Act exceptions. But with regards to the law and why it doesn't happen, you could go on my opponent's Facebook page. And I mean, Pittsburgh just happened. And on his Facebook page, he proclaimed, said, you might think that I'm politicizing this tragedy. That's exactly what I'm doing. You want to know why nothing happens? And I'll tell you what, I give you credit for it. I mean, you didn't just politicize it. You actually said, I am politicizing this tragedy. You haven't even buried the people yet in Pittsburgh. And you are already...
Candidates do not want any of this interaction. Please stop.
It is incredibly important that when these tragedies occur, that we are talking to each other, not past each other. I tell you what, showing up at my office in Patchogue, holding up a sign that has my daughter's names on it, talking about shooting them, does not help get results. It doesn't get results.
Thank you. Thank you. The next question is going to be asked by Mr. Shaw. And Mr. Zeldin, you'll be first.
This is a question from the audience. What measures will you take to enforce our border? And do you agree with the construction of a border wall?
Well, we do need to invest more money into our border, into a physical structure that secures our country. We are investing money over the course of this Congress. We need to invest more into it. That's the physical structure of the border, that is technology, that is manpower. And as I mentioned earlier, it's not just about people, it's also about drugs. It's about guns that come across as well. You could go to the detention center in Yaphank right now and talk to that person who had a gun to their head 20 miles south of the border, who had to smuggle illegal things into our country in order to get across. Now listen, no one's proposing a 30-foot wall on top of the 9,000-foot high Huachuca Mountains. No one's proposing a 30-foot fence in the middle of the Rio Grande. And part of our border already has a physical structure. other parts of our border need a physical structure, and they don't right now. And by the way, if we just cut through the nonsense and just talk to each other, if you go visualize, you go down there for yourself, if you see it for yourself, there are parts of our border that require more of an investment. So do I support more? Absolutely. More border security and more interior enforcement. That's strongly supporting our border patrol agents, that's strongly supporting ICE, that's improving the laws that we have, having more cooperation between ICE and our local law enforcement, that's combating MS-13, it's combating the drug trafficking, sex trafficking, human trafficking, because coming across that border is a young woman who's going to come to, this is a real story, comes to Southampton town and is in a brothel and spends their entire day, this just happened, spending their entire day having sex for money. They don't get the money. And day after day after day after day until the ICE agents came and they saved those children, they're coming across the border. And the human trafficking, where they're told that if they come across and get paid a certain amount, once they come, sorry, we're not going to pay you all that money. They get treated as slaves. Yes, more border security, more interior enforcement.
Thank you. Mr. Gershon?
As I said in my opening, you get an A in performance art. Your answer to your last response, talking about my Facebook page and my politicizing the gun issue, it's about time people stand up and do that. If we ever are going to move forward, we need to talk about it when people are paying attention. Guns in this country are a national tragedy, and we need to do something about it. If we don't do it now, when are we going to do it? When is the time right? When people dodge and say, don't politicize the issue, they never want to politicize because they never want to deal with our gun safety issues. There is no better time than the present. And that means not just guns, which isn't really what I wrote about. I wrote about the hate in America, the hate rhetoric that overcome us, that's led to the events that happened in the last week. We need to do something about that, and that's really what I want to politicize.
Thank you.
In terms of, I don't even got another question. In terms of a border wall, I don't support a border wall. I think it's a myth. That's not the best way to have border security. We need comprehensive immigration reform, and it needs to be bipartisan. And oh, guess what? If Democrats and Republicans in the House were allowed to work together away from House leadership, I bet they would have passed something. In 2013, the Senate passed bipartisan immigration reform and got through the filibuster rules. And the president was ready to sign it, but the House wouldn't pass it. We need to work together on something that both parties can buy into. Yes, we need to improve our immigration. Yes, we need better border security. We need to take better care of our immigrants too. There are people living in this country, in this district, who are being discriminated against right now in the shadows. We shouldn't have that. But we need to do better on a bipartisan basis.
Thank you. Just so everybody knows, there's only going to be 2 more questions. So questioners, make them good. And Ms. Landis, you're first.
No pressure whatsoever.
Or none whatsoever. Just so you know, Mr. Gershon, you're going to answer first.
The quality of the East End's drinking water, which comes from our groundwater, is under scrutiny. There are a myriad of concerns regarding chemical contamination. What initiatives would you support to ensure the quality of our drinking water?
Mr. Gershon, you first.
There are a lot of steps that improve our drinking water. We need to invest in sewers in certain areas where there's enough population density to justify it. We need to invest in clean septic. We need to do it at a county level, we need to do it at a local level, and we need more federal funding to make sure it happens sooner rather than later. We shouldn't be encouraging people dumping into the soil. We should be encouraging less fertilizer use, not more. More local driven probably than federal, but we need to make it a national priority to protect our water. And we need to be funding research. I'm going to go back. Mr. Zeldin was talking about funding research here and how he's a proponent of funding more research. We don't do enough of that. If we really want to improve our drinking water, let's invest more money in research at Stony Brook, where they actually do research in clean septic technology. Bring more money into the district, but it will also help solve our drinking water problem. Research is one of the ways we really move ourselves forward. We should have laws that limit toxic chemical use. That's certainly a step in the right direction as well. We need to take more responsibility for ourselves. We need to all work together. It's got to be cooperative. But making it the priority, I think, is the most important step here.
Thank you. Mr. Zeldin?
Well, something that was a bipartisan success a couple years back, led by Dan Kildee, the Democrats and Republicans in Congress who represent the area around Flint, Michigan. Legislation was passed. Flint isn't alone, but that was led by the Michigan delegation and Dan Kildee to be able to get a pot of money that was desperately needed to mitigate damage that was caused. We have our own local share of issues. PFOS, PFAS, there's a contamination decades old, firefighting foam that was used a long time ago, starting to show up over the course of the last several years around big military installations all across the country, but also small ones too, like Gebreski Airport, or around the old EPCAL site. So right now the Navy is testing homes around the old EPCAL site. They should test more homes and they should do it as quickly as possible. We should ensure everyone has access to clean drinking water if anything ever tests positive. The same thing with regards to the Gebreski. And what we're seeing is some of the costs are caused by and should be paid for by the federal government. Some by state, some by county, and more local government. But every level of government needs to be working together because we have our own shared issues. You know what? I'm talking to colleagues all across the country. You talk about the PFOS, the PFAS, that kind of contamination is going on all around America. Brendan Boyle, who's a Democratic congressman from Pennsylvania, introduced an amendment. I helped him get it passed with a coalition that we put together of Republicans and Democrats to invest in more money for that fund that gets used for this mitigation. The cleanup cost is huge. It's not something that all across America is going to get cleaned up over the course of the year. It's going to take a long time. However, we need to ensure that in the meantime, as quickly as possible, everyone is ensured that they have access to clean drinking water. That's very important.
Thank you. Ms. Manu, you're going to ask the last question, and Mr. Zeldin, you're going to answer.
Thank you. So this is another audience question. What is your position on term limits for members of Congress?
Strongly support term limits for members of Congress. I co-sponsor all sorts of different bills. If you had a vote in front of me for 6, 8, 10, 12, some of these bills have 2-year terms, 3-year terms, 4-year terms, there are all sorts of combinations thereof. I co-sponsor all sorts of different bills. For residents of Brookhaven, there happens to be a term limit proposal that's on the ballot. This year, I would encourage people in Brookhaven Town to go out and flip their ballots over to vote in favor of term limits in Brookhaven Town. There are members of Congress who have been serving longer than I've been alive. They're good people. However, I believe that you come in, you bring your energy, your ideas, and then, again, whether you had a vote on 6, 8, 10, 12, I vote for any of it. I believe that our founding fathers' intent is that you go down to Washington, you bring your ideas, you try to make a difference, and then you move on to something else. My predecessor was in office for 12 years. I got along with him well. But the district, once you go through 12 years, it's actually a good time for there to be a turnover all across the country. But again, if it was 6, 8, 10, 12, any of that, I'd be supportive of. Now, in a way, you already have term limits. I'm sure my opponents, supporters in the crowd, would love to, charge for the next 8 days, as my supporters are charging hard for the next 8 days, because you have term limits every time you vote. You can hire or fire the person who's representing you. Unfortunately, we don't plan on making it too easy for you here in the last 8 days. But I would say regardless of how these elections come out, and we're fighting hard, and everyone's under one roof, one auditorium, is that after the election is over, we work together. That's my goal for November 7th.
Thank you. Mr. Gershon?
Performance art. Term limits. Mixed thing. There are things you can say for them, there are things you can say against them. One of the problems with term limits, with not having term limits, is you end up with classes of professional politicians. You have people who've spent their whole life as politicians and never worked in the private sector. That's not healthy if we have too much of that in government. And if everyone comes from the private sector and no one's been in government, that's not healthy either. That's the difference between us. I've been in the private sector for 30 years, and I think the government could use more of that today. But the real good thing about term limits is that it changes the fundraising reality. I mean, right now, we've got 2-year terms, and congressmen spend way too much of their time raising money into a system that needs to be reformed. We should have public campaign finance. I'm endorsed by Any Citizens United, and I'm endorsed by them for a reason. I want to get money out of politics. Lee as your leader, me as hopefully your future leader, should be working for you, not working for the people who fund us. I don't take any corporate PAC money. I took one donation before I made the pledge from a friend who gave me $1,000, and I'm upfront about that. But other than that, I don't take corporate PAC money. He takes a lot of it. Ask him how much. That's how we don't become reliant on our funders. That's how we work for the people who vote for us. That's really what we should be talking about. Thank you.
Mr. Zeldin, would like a minute?
You make some decisions in life. I chose to serve in the United States Army on active duty. I graduated with a law degree, could have made a whole lot more money outside of the military. But I chose, they do give you like $150 a month in jump pay. Maybe that would have been like 20% of what I would have been making if I just went to private practice. After I got off active duty, I started up a law firm, and it did well. You know what? I took a pay cut to leave that private practice that I started up in order to go serve in the New York State Senate. Even though it pays less, and I wasn't able to do something that had a promise of I could be making hundreds of thousands of dollars within a couple of years, but instead I went up to Albany, and I'm proud of what we're able to succeed. We all make decisions in life. I happened to be in Iraq in 06 while my opponent was making himself a lot of money in 2006 in Manhattan. We all make decisions. I don't fault anyone for choosing business as a profession. I happen to serve in the military, and I'm not embarrassed to say that or feel like that's something that should be attacked.
Thank you. Mr. Gershon would like a minute.
And I certainly would not say anything but thank you for your military service. However, wasn't the question. The question was about term limits. And my point is that we should have a mix of people in the government. Some people who've been in government for their lives is okay. And some people who've been in business for portions of their life is okay too. And having a mix of the two is probably the best way to move forward, so we can have a cross-pollination of ideas. We can't have all of one type or all of the other. And as you say, both approaches are fine. That's how we are America. We're one country. We've got to unify. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to go into closing statements now. And I'm going to ask you one more time, please hold your applause till they're both finished, and then we can thank them for their candor and for being here. So, Mr. Gershon, you're first.
Obviously, there's a lot different between the two of us. It'd be crazy for me not to point that out. We're different on healthcare, we're different on the environment, we're different on gun safety, we're different on taxes. We didn't talk about that enough. one priority we should be talking about is getting rid of the salt tax limit, deduction limit. That's bad for all of us here in New York. It's a way the government discriminated against New Yorkers. And we should be speaking up very, very loudly to undo it. But there's a lot at stake in this election. I'm proud to say I have the endorsement of Newsday. It came out yesterday. They made a few points contrasting us, and they like the idea of a new approach. A person, regardless of whether I grew up in this district or not, I've been a taxpayer and a resident for 20 plus years now. And Newsday's point, better to have someone who's concerned with the issues of the people here in New York, who stands for the right causes, than an extreme leader who's too associated with the Trump wing of the Republican Party and guys like Steve Bannon and Sebastian Gorka.
Thank you.
Thank
Mr. Zeldin?
Again, there is a lot of contrast. My opponent admits that he recently registered our district just to run for Congress. He has said during his Democratic primary he was in favor of cutting off coordination and cooperation between ICE and our local forces. During his Democratic primary, before he changed his position, he said that he believes that Nancy Pelosi is doing a great job and that he would vote for her for Speaker. I don't believe that Nancy Pelosi should be the next Speaker of the House. I don't believe Maxine Waters should be the chair of the next House Financial Services Committee. I don't believe Adam
Please let him finish. Please let him finish.
the House Intelligence Committee. I don't believe that we should have free health care for people who are not here in our country legally, and I also don't believe that we should be bankrupting Medicare for seniors. There is a lot of contrast between the two of us. I happen to be born and raised from Long Island. Yeah, there's some contrast there in the fact that this has always been my home. My opponent says that he's went to 38,000 miles on his car. Okay, well then I could take credit for the hundreds of thousands, if not millions of miles that I've driven in my car because I'm actually from here. Now I'm asking for your continued support after next Tuesday, but I'll say this. And I really do thank everybody for being here. And maybe it's a message from both of us.
Thank you.
Okay,
I think they've done a great job.
Thank you.